Some milestones feel like the universe finally cashing in on all those sleepless nights and microwaved ramen dinners. Earning my MD was supposed to be one of those moments. I'd pictured it 1,000 times. The big auditorium at the University of Chicago Medical Center, the faculty lined up in their regalia, my parents in the front row, grinning like they'd personally invented the concept of higher education. Instead, there I was, 24, wearing a polyester gown that clung to my knees like a needy toddler, scanning rows of strangers' faces for two people who never bothered to come. As my classmates posed for photos, I lingered by a potted fern, pretending to read the commencement program cover to cover. Some people cried happy tears. I was just trying not to look like the guy whose family RSVP'd. Hard pass. A few parents offered me sympathetic nods, the way you might nod to someone whose dog just died. My roommate's grandmother, Mrs. Dalton, came over and pressed the tissue into my hand. She smelled like menthol cough drops and unconditional support. "You did it, sweetheart," she said, giving my shoulder a squeeze. "That's what matters." I wanted to believe her. But as the auditorium emptied and the squeak of folding chairs echoed around me, all I could think was, how is it that everyone else's parents could show up for this, but mine couldn't even be bothered to fake it? I tried to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe their flight was delayed. Maybe there was a freak Midwestern blizzard in May. Maybe they'd lost their phones in some spontaneous act of divine intervention. I scrolled through my messages. Nothing from my mom. Nothing from my dad. Not even a "Congrats, bud." Not even a thumbs up emoji. Finally, I called my mom, half hoping she'd answer in a panic, apologizing for running late. She picked up immediately, sounding relaxed enough to be horizontal. "Hi, Caleb. What's going on?" My throat felt tight. "Graduation ended an hour ago." A beat of silence. Then, "Oh, right. Today was your big day." I swallowed, my mouth dry. "Where are you?" "Oh, honey, we're on the Caribbean cruise with Ryan. Didn't he tell you? We booked it to celebrate his new job." I blinked. "The sales job he started last week? He's been working so hard," she gushed. "It just felt right to mark the occasion." I almost laughed. I'd spent 4 years buried under anatomy flashcards and the constant terror of accidentally killing a plastic mannequin in simulation lab, and my little brother gets a vacation for making it through 2 weeks of corporate training. "That's great," I said, my voice flat. "Honey, don't be upset," she said, like she was soothing a toddler who dropped an ice cream cone. "We'll plan something for you when we're back." "Don't bother," I said, feeling something snap in my chest. "Don't bother showing up to my future either." Before she could answer, I hung up. I stood there for a while, the phone still in my hand, trying to decide if I was angry or just tired. Maybe both. Outside, the sky was bright and full of possibility. Inside me, it felt like all the air had been sucked out. I walked out of the auditorium alone, my diploma folder tucked under my arm, fighting the urge to drop it in the nearest trash can. On the steps, a woman with a camera asked if I wanted a professional photo. I almost said yes out of reflex, but what was the point? To commemorate the day, I realized I could achieve everything I'd ever dreamed of and still come in second to my brother's LinkedIn update. "No thanks," I muttered. I passed groups of families hugging, crying, toasting with plastic flutes of cheap champagne. I stepped around a kid being lifted onto his dad's shoulders, his tiny graduation cap flopping over his eyes. All I could think was how much I'd wanted that moment. Just once. To feel like I was worth showing up for. Back at my apartment, I peeled off the gown and dropped it on the couch, where it landed like a deflated balloon. The silence was almost comical. That's when I realized, it wasn't that they'd forgotten me. They just decided Ryan was more important. And this time, I was finally done pretending I didn't notice. Back at my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my dress shirt and tie, staring at the wall like it might suddenly sprout answers. I thought about calling someone, my roommate, my old lab partner, even Mrs. Dalton. But I didn't. Because what was I supposed to say? "Hey, remember when I graduated med school today?" My parents were too busy sipping margaritas on the Lido deck to notice. Instead, I stood up and went to the hall closet. I knew exactly where I'd hidden it, the cardboard box labeled, "For when they pretend to care." I'd started filling it months earlier, back when it hit me that someday they might come knocking, acting shocked that I'd distanced myself. Like this was all a misunderstanding I'd imagined, instead of years of being treated like the background character in Ryan's highlight reel. I pulled the box down and set it on the kitchen table. Inside were the receipts of my life, the ones no one ever asked to see. My acceptance letter to med school, which they'd never acknowledged beyond a terse "nice." The dean's list notifications I'd taped to the fridge until I got tired of watching them curl in yellow, untouched. A stack of certificates: excellence in anatomy, top performer in emergency medicine rotation, leadership award. All the paper proof that I wasn't just doing fine. The offer letters from residency programs. The one I'd accepted, general surgery at Chicago Mercy, was on top. I'd printed it on heavy cardstock, the kind you save for wedding invitations, thinking maybe it would finally impress them. A handmade birthday card I'd sent them last year. It had a dumb cartoon heart on the front and a note inside that said, "I miss you." It came back unopened, marked "Return to sender." I stared at that card for a long time, my throat thick. I'd always assumed if I just achieved enough, they'd have no choice but to see me. But apparently, even an MD wasn't enough to compete with a Caribbean cruise and Ryan's sales job. On top of everything, I placed a single sheet of paper. I wrote the note slowly, each word deliberate, like I was carving it in stone. If you ever wonder why I stopped trying to earn your approval, read everything inside out loud. I sealed the box with packing tape. My hands were steady. My chest was not. Then I grabbed a Sharpie and wrote their address in big, block letters. I thought about adding ATN, the parents who forgot, but decided even I wasn't that petty yet. I carried it to the post office in the rain, and the lady behind the counter gave me the same look you'd give someone mailing a severed head. "Anything fragile, hazardous, or perishable?" she asked. "Only the last 24 years of my self-esteem," I said before I could stop myself. She blinked. Media mail it is." I walked home in wet dress shoes, feeling lighter than I'd felt in months. Not because I thought they'd actually read it. Not because I believed it would magically change anything. I did it because I was tired. Tired of pretending their absence didn't matter. Tired of acting like their approval was still worth chasing. When I got home, I set my diploma on the coffee table and stared at it for a while. It didn't look like a trophy. It looked like evidence. Evidence that I'd kept going, even when they weren't watching. And for once, it felt like that was enough. 2 weeks passed without a single text or call. I'd almost started to believe the box had vanished into a postal black hole, wedged somewhere between jury summons and Bed Bath and Beyond coupons. Then, on a Thursday evening, there was a knock on my door. 3 slow raps, like someone trying to seem casual while absolutely not being casual. I opened it and almost laughed. There stood my father, holding the box in both hands like it weighed 100 pounds. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his mouth. Or maybe he'd always looked like that, and I'd just been too busy trying to impress him to notice. "Caleb," he said, voice low. I didn't invite him in. I just stepped aside and let him walk past me. He shuffled to the kitchen table and set the box down with a soft thud, like it might explode if he moved too fast. Neither of us spoke. He sat in the chair I always used when I studied late, where I'd read until dawn while the rest of the world slept. He looked around like he'd never been here before, which, to be fair, he hadn't. I crossed my arms. "Did you read it?" He swallowed. "Not yet." I nodded to the box. "Go ahead." His hands shook as he peeled the tape back. One by one, he pulled out the documents. The acceptance letter. The certificates. The residency offer. He laid them on the table in a neat, careful row. When he reached the birthday card, he hesitated. His thumb traced the edge of the envelope, and for a second, I wondered if he'd start crying. He didn't. He cleared his throat. "Caleb, why didn't you tell us you felt like this?" My laugh came out dry and hollow. "Tell you when exactly? In between Ryan's endless celebrations?" Or the times you were too busy to pick up the phone because you were helping him get settled in his new apartment? He looked down at the table. We thought you were fine. You never asked for anything. I rubbed a hand over my face. I didn't ask because I was tired of hearing that my achievements were just expected. Like I was supposed to do all of this quietly, while Ryan got a damn parade for buying a used Camry. He winced. That's not fair. I raised an eyebrow. Isn't it? He didn't answer. For a long moment, the only sound was the refrigerator humming behind us. He looked like he wanted to shrink into the chair, disappear into the linoleum. I didn't know you felt overlooked, he said finally, voice raw. I stared at him, trying to figure out if he actually believed that. If he really thought I wouldn't notice the way they never came to my white coat ceremony, or my poster presentation, or any of the milestones they claimed were so important. You didn't know, I repeated slowly. Or you didn't care? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I waited, arms crossed. He didn't answer. That was an answer all by itself. My father didn't move. He just sat there, staring at the papers lined up like an indictment. Maybe because that's what they were. You want to know when it started? I asked, my voice low. When I was 12 and won that statewide science competition. You remember that? He nodded, eyes fixed on the table. Yeah. You told me you were proud. For exactly 5 minutes. Then Ryan got a most improved certificate in Little League, and you canceled my celebratory dinner so we could take him to Applebee's. He closed his eyes, like if he didn't look at me, the memory might vanish. That was the first time, I said, but it wasn't the last. When I got the lead in the school play, Mom said she tried to make it to opening night. She never showed. But she was there for every one of Ryan's soccer games, even when he spent most of them on the bench. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Every word felt like it weighed a pound. When I got into med school, you said, "That's great, Caleb," and then asked if I could help Ryan with his resume. When I matched for residency, you didn't even call. But you had time to fly to Atlanta for Ryan's engagement party, where, by the way, you told everyone I was thinking about becoming a doctor, like I'd just started considering it. My father winced, his mouth pinched tight. And when I invited you both to my white coat ceremony? I shook my head. You texted me the morning of to say you'd forgotten there was a family commitment. You didn't even bother to lie about what it was, a backyard barbecue for Ryan's birthday. His shoulders slumped, as if all the oxygen had leaked out of him. I took a breath, trying to steady the ache in my chest. I used to tell myself it didn't matter. That as long as I kept going, kept achieving, eventually you'd have no choice but to see me. He looked up, his eyes glassy. Caleb. But you didn't. I cut in. You just kept assuming I was fine. That I didn't need anything. That I was built to be overlooked because I was the responsible one. He rubbed a hand over his face. We thought you didn't need us. I laughed, just once, sharp and bitter. That's the thing, Dad. Being good at something doesn't mean you don't want someone to be proud of you. He didn't speak. The refrigerator hummed behind us, filling the silence that had existed between us for years. You know what's funny? I said, gesturing to the pile of proof between us. You always told me to set an example for Ryan. Work harder. Be responsible. Do the right thing. But somehow, the only reward I ever got for following your advice was to be invisible. He shook his head slowly, like he could rewind decades if he just disagreed hard enough. You don't have to say anything, I added, my voice quieter. I didn't mail that box because I wanted an apology. I mailed it so you'd see exactly what you missed while you were busy cheering him on. His mouth opened and closed. His gaze drifted over the papers again. I didn't realize, he whispered finally, his voice ragged. I nodded once. That's the problem. And for the first time in my life, he didn't try to argue. He didn't move for a long time. Just sat there with his hand pressed over the birthday card like he thought maybe, if he concentrated hard enough, it would turn into something easier to look at. When he finally lifted his gaze, he pulled something from his jacket pocket, a crisp white envelope, already creased from being handled too many times. He pushed it across the table without meeting my eyes. I glanced at it warily, half expecting another awkward apology card or some clumsy attempt to wrap this up neatly. Instead, I recognized the letterhead right away: Chicago Mercy Hospital. I picked it up and scanned the first few lines. "Congratulations on your appointment as chief resident." The words blurred for a second. I blinked until they came back into focus. I set it down slowly. My heart felt like it had dropped somewhere near my shoes. "You got this?" I asked, my voice flatter than I meant. He nodded. "It came last week. Your mother brought in the mail. She assumed it was another university newsletter." "Another newsletter," I repeated, because sometimes you have to say the absurd thing out loud just to believe it. "She didn't mean anything by it," he said quickly, like that made it better. "She never does," I muttered. He shifted in his seat, looking anywhere but at me. "I opened it," he went on. I don't know what I thought. That maybe you'd call and tell us yourself." I swallowed hard. "I didn't call because I wanted to see if you'd find out on your own." He ran a hand over his face. For a second, I almost thought he was going to cry. "Chief resident," he said finally, his voice breaking a little. That's a big deal, isn't it?" I almost laughed. "Yeah, Dad. It's a big deal. It's the kind of thing people celebrate." His eyes were watery. I looked away, because I didn't want to feel sorry for him. I didn't want to let the guilt slip in and convince me this was all just a tragic misunderstanding. "I guess I just stopped trying to get your attention," I said. "At some point, it felt pathetic to keep hoping you'd notice." He didn't argue. He didn't tell me I was wrong. He just looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, like the truth had finally managed to crack something in him. "I thought you were okay," he whispered. "You always were. You were the one who never needed help." I pressed my palms flat on the table. "You know what? That's exactly it. You decided I was okay, so you stopped checking. You stopped showing up. You convinced yourself that ignoring me wasn't neglect, it was trust." He opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw worked like he was trying to bite back words. "You know what's funny?" I went on, my voice shaking. "You always used to say Ryan would figure things out eventually. That he just needed time. But somehow, I was the one you expected to be an adult at 15. I was the one you never worried about, never asked about, never showed up for." His gaze dropped to the letter again. He picked it up like he needed proof it was real. "We were proud of you," he said finally, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. "Yeah?" I asked. "Funny how you were always too busy to say it." A heavy silence settled between us. I could practically feel the years of resentment pushing up between us like weeds through a cracked sidewalk. He rubbed a thumb over the edge of the envelope. His voice was hoarse when he finally spoke. "What do you want me to do, Caleb?" he asked. "Tell me how to fix this." I looked at him, at the creases in his forehead, at the shoulders that had seemed so broad when I was a kid. "I don't know," I admitted. My throat felt tight. "Maybe there isn't a way to fix it." My father didn't move to leave. He just sat there, turning the chief resident letter over in his hands like he was hoping it might contain a set of instructions on how to be a better parent. I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. I should have felt vindicated, maybe even triumphant. But all I felt was tired, like finally saying everything out loud had drained some reservoir I hadn't realized was finite. "You know," I said, "I used to think if I could just check enough boxes, you'd have to see me. I thought someday I'd do something so impressive you wouldn't have a choice." His eyes flicked up to mine, red-rimmed. "Caleb, you've always been impressive. Then why didn't you act like it?" He didn't answer. Just looked back down at the table. I thought about all the times I'd tried to pretend it didn't bother me. The nights I'd sat alone in my apartment, eating leftover takeout while scrolling through photos of Ryan's birthday parties, engagement dinners, housewarmings, every event that got the whole family together while I was an afterthought. When I finally spoke, my voice came out quieter than I expected. "You know what it feels like? It feels like being punished for being capable." His brows knit together. "What do you mean?" "It means that every time you ignored me, it wasn't because you didn't love me, it was because you decided I didn't need you. You convinced yourself I was fine on my own, so you could focus on Ryan. Because he was always the one who needed help. He flinched, but didn't deny it. And I did it. I went on. I played along. I made sure you never had to worry about me. Because I thought if I was good enough, you'd come around. He wiped a hand across his face, and for a moment, I almost saw my father as he'd been when I was small, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who used to hoist me onto his shoulders so I could touch the ceiling. I didn't know when that version of him disappeared. Maybe he never really existed. I'm sorry, he said finally. The words sounded rusty, like he hadn't used them in years. I didn't say anything. I should have been there. He went on, his voice breaking. I should have told you how proud I was. I should have, Caleb, I don't know why I didn't. The worst part was that I could tell he meant it. He wasn't making excuses. He wasn't trying to twist it into something that hurt less. He just sounded defeated. I know you can't forgive me, he said quietly. I wouldn't if I were you. I stared at him for a long moment. I don't know if I can, I admitted. He nodded like he'd already expected that answer. Maybe he had. We sat there in silence, the box between us like a fence. I wish I could go back. He murmured, his thumb skimming over the edge of the envelope again. I wish I'd paid attention. I thought about how many times I'd wished the same thing. He looked up at me, his expression hollow. Your mother wants to see you, he said finally. She's been crying about this every night. That's interesting, I said, my voice cool. Considering she didn't even call. He winced. She doesn't know how to talk about it. Neither do I. I shook my head. I don't need a speech. I don't need you to explain. I just need you to understand how this feels. I do, he whispered. More than I ever thought I would. Good, I said. Then maybe we're finally on the same page. He sat back, exhaling like he'd been holding his breath for years. What now? He asked. I thought about it. About how easy it would be to pretend this conversation fixed everything. To let him leave thinking we were fine. But I was done pretending. I don't know, I said. I really don't. And for once, he didn't try to fill the silence with hollow reassurances. He just nodded, his shoulders sinking under the weight of everything we'd left unsaid for too long. My father didn't stay much longer. After a few more minutes of silence, he stood up, carefully gathered the papers back into the box, and tucked the chief resident letter into the pocket of his coat like he thought it might get lost again if he wasn't careful. I'll tell your mother you're all right, he said, voice rough. I'm not, I corrected him. But I'm better than I used to be. He nodded, looking like he didn't trust himself to say anything else without falling apart. And then he left, pulling the door closed behind him so gently you'd think it was made of glass. I didn't move right away. I stood in the kitchen with my arms folded tight, breathing in the heavy, post-confession quiet. The next morning, my phone buzzed just after 6 a.m. I almost didn't look, figured it was a pharmacy reminder or an automated call about my student loans. But when I finally picked it up, I saw my dad's name on the screen, along with a single-line text. Your mom wants to see you. She's sorry. Will you come home? I stared at it until the screen dimmed. 2 hours later, another message came. We'll understand if you say no. I set the phone down and went about my day. I saw my first patients. I signed charts. I made a cup of cheap coffee that tasted like regret and hospital-grade disinfectant. But that text hovered in the back of my mind like an unfinished sentence. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend none of this was happening. Another part wanted to drive straight to my parents' house and scream every buried grievance into the walls. In the end, I didn't do either. I just sat at my kitchen table that evening, staring at the window, while the sky turned from pale blue to the deep indigo of early spring. When I finally picked up the phone again, my thumb hovered over the keyboard for a long time before I typed. I'll come by tomorrow. But if she starts making excuses, I'm leaving. His reply was almost instant. Understood. The next day, I pulled into the driveway of the house I'd grown up in, A squat brick ranch that hadn't been updated since the early 90s. The lawn looked exactly the same. The cracked walkway. The same wind chime by the front door, still making that cheap, hollow sound every time the breeze caught it. For a second, I sat there gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I felt like I was 16 again, coming home after soccer practice to find out they'd forgotten to pick me up. Like some part of me had frozen in that moment and never thawed out. I got out of the car. I knocked once and let myself in, because the door was still unlocked like it always had been. My mother was sitting in the living room. She looked smaller than I remembered, like the air had been let out of her. She was wearing a blue cardigan I'd bought her for Christmas 5 years ago, a detail I tried not to read into. "Caleb," she said softly. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, waiting to see if she'd start with excuses. She didn't. "I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. I don't have any good explanation. I can't pretend I do." I swallowed. My throat felt raw. "Then don't." She nodded, her eyes brimming. "I chose your brother over you again and again. I told myself you didn't need me as much. That you were the strong one. That you'd be fine." I let out a shaky breath. "And you really believe that?" "I wanted to," she admitted. "Because it was easier. Because it meant I didn't have to feel guilty." It was the first honest thing she'd said to me in years. We sat there for a long moment, the silence filled with everything neither of us knew how to fix. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she said finally. "I wouldn't. But I had to tell you I'm sorry." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything. She stood up, wiping her eyes. "Would you stay for dinner?" I shook my head. "Not today." She didn't look surprised. Just sat in that quiet, exhausted way people get when they realize there's no going back. But as I turned to leave, I paused at the doorway. "Maybe another time," I said. Her eyes closed like she was trying not to start crying again. "Okay," she whispered. I walked out into the cool evening air, feeling something I couldn't name yet. Not relief. Not closure. But maybe the beginning of it. Over the next few weeks, I waited for the guilt to turn into something I could use: anger, resolve, maybe even closure. But mostly, I just felt hollow, like I'd excavated some old wound and didn't know how to fill the space it left behind. I didn't reach out to them, and for a while, they didn't reach out to me either. I figured that was probably for the best. We'd said the important things, and anything else could wait. Then, one afternoon, my phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "We'd like to come to your white coat dinner, if you'll let us." I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Part of me wanted to say no, just to prove I could. But another part, the one that still wanted to believe people could change, typed back. "Okay. You can come." The night of the dinner, I almost expected them to bail again. But when I walked into the banquet hall, they were already there, sitting awkwardly at a round table near the back, dressed like they weren't sure how formal it was supposed to be. I stood there for a second, watching them. My dad twisting his wedding ring around his finger, my mom folding and refolding her napkin. Neither of them looked comfortable. And for the first time, I realized they were the ones who didn't know how to act. They were the ones out of place. It didn't erase everything, but it felt like something. After the ceremony, they came up to me together. My mother reached for my hand but didn't try to hold it when I didn't reach back. "You look so confident up there," she said, voice soft. "Like you've known who you are for a long time." I swallowed. "I have." My dad nodded, eyes a little glassy. "We're proud of you." It didn't land like a revelation. It just felt like a sentence, one that should have been said years ago. But I took it anyway. In the weeks that followed, they kept showing up. Not in grand gestures, just small, quiet ways. My mom texted once a week to ask about my schedule. My dad called to say he'd read an article about medical residents and thought of me. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was enough to make me consider the possibility of a future where we weren't strangers. Ryan, of course, called me dramatic when he found out I'd confronted them. He left a voicemail about how I was Holding on to old stuff. And should. Just get over it. I blocked his number without a second thought. For the first time in my life, that decision didn't come with guilt. 3 months later, on the morning I started my residency, I woke up early. The sun wasn't even up yet, and the city outside my window was still quiet, like it was holding its breath. I put on my scrubs, tied my shoes, picked up my ID badge and clipped it to my chest. Then I stood there for a minute, looking at my reflection in the dark TV screen. I didn't feel like someone waiting for applause anymore. I didn't feel like a kid desperate for his parents to show up. I felt like a man who'd finally realized his worth wasn't something they got to decide. That was the best part of all. I walked out into the cool dawn air and headed to the hospital, feeling, for once, exactly where I was supposed to be.